The screaming began at 4:45 a.m. on July 7, 1944. 4,000 Japanese voices erupted from the darkness of Saipan. Their chant echoed across the coral beaches like thunder. Tenno Haka Banzai. Long live the Emperor. The largest Banzai charge in Pacific War history was about to collide with American mathematical precision. What followed would prove that spiritual warfare could not defeat technological coordination. Industrial killing would triumph over ancient honor codes. The age of samurai tactics would die in a barrage of synchronized artillery shells. But 6 hours earlier, Captain Ben Salomon had no idea his steady dentist hands would soon grip a machine gun. The former dental officer wiped sweat from his forehead with a blood-stained surgical towel. His pyramidal aid station tent sat just 50 yards behind American foxholes. Inside, wounded soldiers groaned on stretchers and muddy ground. Their pain mixed with distant Japanese voices drifting through tropical air. Saipan's sticky heat pressed down like a wet blanket. The metallic scent of blood and cordite hung heavy in the darkness. Salomon adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and bent over another wounded soldier. His hands moved with surgical precision. These same hands had once fixed cavities in peaceful dental offices. Now, they saved lives in a combat zone. Something felt wrong tonight. The Japanese voices carried unusual urgency. Normal sporadic rifle fire had stopped. Instead, an ominous shuffling echoed through the darkness. Thousands of boots moved across volcanic rock and coral. The sound grew steadily louder. "Doc, you hear that?" A wounded soldier from the 27th Infantry Division whispered. His New York accent cut through humid air. "Sounds like the whole damn Japanese army is moving up there." Salomon paused his medical work to listen carefully. Beyond the ridge, sake bottles clinked like wind chimes. Japanese officers distributed final liquid courage to their men. Metal scraped against metal as swords slid from ancient sheaths. The sound created an almost musical rhythm in pre-dawn darkness. What Americans didn't realize was that 4,000 desperate Japanese soldiers were gathering for Gyokosai. Honorable destruction. Death before surrender. Lieutenant Colonel William O'Brien crouched in his foxhole 250 yards from the beach. Through field glasses, he studied the dangerous gap between his 1st Battalion and Major Edward McCarthy's 2nd Battalion. He had requested reinforcements twice. None were available. In desperation, he positioned anti-tank weapons to cover the 100-yard opening. Deep in his gut, O'Brien knew it wouldn't be enough. "Sir," his radio operator whispered, "artillery's asking for final coordinates." 3 miles offshore, the USS Birmingham's radio room crackled with precise calculations. American artillery observers fine-tuned what they called time on target. This revolutionary coordination technique synchronized multiple artillery batteries. They would deliver devastating, concentrated firepower at exactly the same moment. Mathematical warfare. Chaos transformed into lethal precision. But hidden in caves and spider holes across northern Saipan, General Yoshitsugu Saito's remaining forces prepared for something Americans had never experienced on this scale. The largest Banzai charge in Pacific War history. Every able-bodied man would charge. Soldiers, sailors, even civilians with bamboo spears. The human wave assault was scheduled for 4:45 a.m. They would overwhelm American positions through sheer desperate courage. Captain Salomon returned to treating a Marine with shrapnel wounds. He had no idea that in 5 hours his steady dentist hands would be gripping a machine gun. He would be surrounded by 98 enemy bodies. American technological coordination was about to collide with Japanese spiritual determination. The most one-sided massacre of the Pacific War was approaching. The question wasn't whether the Japanese would charge. The question was whether American artillery coordination could turn a terrifying assault into systematic annihilation. Humid darkness throbbed with whispered prayers. Rifle bolts clicked metallically. Two fundamentally different military philosophies prepared for collision. In American foxholes, soldiers adjusted their equipment with methodical precision. Industrial warfare demanded systematic preparation. They checked ammunition counts, they tested radio frequencies, they coordinated overlapping fields of fire. 300 yards away, Japanese soldiers knelt in prayer circles. They wrote final letters to families they would never see again. Their faces glowed in light from sack bottles passed from trembling hand to trembling hand. This was spiritual preparation for sacred death. Major Edward McCarthy huddled over his field radio. His voice cut through static. Fire Direction Center, this is Tango 26. Request confirmation on concentration Charlie 7. The response came back immediately. Coordinates locked. Firing solutions calculated. Multiple battery positions synchronized for maximum effectiveness. This was the American way of war. Technological coordination turned individual units into a single devastating weapon system. But the Japanese were preparing for something entirely different. In a limestone cave 500 yards north of American lines, General Saito's final conference was ending. The wounded feeble commander had chosen death over defeat, but not before ordering every surviving defender to participate in one final gyokusai. Captain Sakai Oba checked his sword one last time. He and 200 other officers would lead the charge. They were marching toward certain death. The password tonight, Oba told his men, is 7 lives for one's country. Among the assembling Japanese forces, Sergeant Takeo Yamamoto stared at the sake bottle in his hands. This liquid courage wouldn't stop American bullets. A former Russian language student who secretly admired Soviet communism, Yamamoto understood military tactics well enough to recognize suicide when he saw it. But Bushido code demanded he charge anyway. Honor before survival. Spiritual purity over tactical wisdom. In his aid station, Captain Salomon suddenly noticed the change in sound. Random Japanese chatter had organized into rhythmic chanting. Tenno haka banzai. Tenno haka banzai. Long live the emperor. The voices were getting closer. There were thousands of them. Get those wounded men ready to move, Salomon ordered his medics. His instincts, honed by months of frontline surgery, were screaming danger. 3 miles behind the front lines, American artillery crews performed calculations that would revolutionize warfare. Battery commanders studied their firing tables. They calculated precise flight times for shells fired from different distances. When the call came, every artillery piece would deliver shells to arrive at exactly the same instant. From 75mm pack howitzers to massive 155mm guns. It was called time on target. This technique transformed scattered artillery into a single devastating weapon. Artillery observer Captain Louis Ackerman crouched in a forward observation post. Field telephone pressed to his ear. "Bernie, you getting the coordinates?" he asked Captain Bernard Tauth. "Because when this thing kicks off, I'm going to need you to drop it right on top of us." "How close?" Toth's voice crackled through static. "Danger close. 75 yards from friendly positions." The mathematics of death were being calculated in real time. Shell trajectories, blast radii, fragmentation patterns, all coordinated to create an invisible wall of steel and high explosive. The front lines of Saipan would become the most lethal 1,000 yards in the Pacific. Meanwhile, Japanese assembly continued with religious fervor. Walking wounded leaned on bamboo crutches. their bandages soaked with blood and sweat. Civilians clutched sharpened sticks and broken bottles. Men, women, even children. Their eyes were wide with propaganda-induced terror of American brutality. They believed capture meant torture and death. This suicidal charge was their only honorable option. The contrast couldn't be starker. American preparation focused on coordination, communication, and technological advantage. Radio operators synchronized watches to the second. Artillery crews adjusted elevation with mathematical precision. Infantry coordinated interlocking fields of fire. Every element worked together like components in a vast lethal machine. Japanese preparation was spiritual and emotional. Officers burned personal letters and family photographs. Soldiers distributed their few remaining possessions. Everyone participated in final prayers to ancestors. They weren't preparing for battle. They were preparing for sacred death, believing their sacrifice would somehow delay American victory and honor their emperor. At 3:30 a.m., the Japanese began their final approach. Through night glasses, Lieutenant Colonel O'Brien watched thousands of shapes moving through darkness. A human river flowing toward his thin, defensive line. The sound was unlike anything he had experienced. The shuffle of feet, the clink of equipment, and underneath it all, a low humming. Thousands of men chanted prayers for honorable death. "Jesus Christ," O'Brien whispered to his radio operator. "There's got to be 4,000 of them." His message reached every American position within minutes. It triggered the most precise artillery coordination in Pacific War history. Battery commanders checked their watches. They adjusted final calculations. They waited for the signal that would turn mathematical theory into devastating reality. In his aid station, Captain Salomon heard the approaching chant growing louder. His hands stayed steady as he loaded another wounded soldier onto a stretcher. But his mind was racing. The dentist, who wanted to be an infantry officer, was about to get his wish in the most horrific way possible. The stage was set for collision. Japanese spiritual determination versus American technological coordination. 4,000 desperate men charging toward mathematical annihilation. At 4:44 a.m., everything changed. The explosion of sound at 4:45 a.m. shattered the tropical night like the world was ending. Tenno Haka Banzai! Tenno Haka Banzai! 4,000 Japanese voices screamed in unison. The largest banzai charge in Pacific War history erupted from darkness. Officers waved ancestral swords above their heads, their silhouettes backlit by the first hint of dawn. They led waves of desperate soldiers walking wounded on crutches and terrified civilians clutching bamboo spears. Major Edward McCarthy commanded the 2nd Battalion, 105th Infantry. He watched the human tsunami approach his positions and immediately grabbed his radio. "It looks like a cattle stampede from a Western movie," he shouted into the handset. "Except these Japanese just keep coming and coming." The first wave hit the gap between O'Brien's and McCarthy's battalions like water flowing through a broken dam. Japanese soldiers poured through the 100-yard opening, screaming, firing from the hip, bayonets glinting in pre-dawn light. Lieutenant Colonel O'Brien stood in his foxhole with a pistol in each hand. He shouted encouragement to his men as muzzle flashes lit up his face like a deadly strobe light. "Hold your ground. Don't give them an inch." But this wasn't just chaos. This was American coordination in action. Captain Bernard Tauth's voice crackled through the artillery radio network. "Fire mission? Concentration? Charlie 7. All batteries stand by for time on target." Across 3 miles of Saipan's western coastline, 18 American artillery batteries received identical firing solutions. Mathematics calculated in advance now became devastating reality. Battery commanders checked their synchronized watches. Time on target in 30 seconds. 15 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, fire. The night exploded. 144 artillery shells launched simultaneously from positions scattered across southern Saipan, from 75mm pack howitzers to massive 155mm guns. Different trajectories, different flight times, but identical arrival time. Exactly 47 seconds after launch, every shell would detonate in a concentrated area just 75 yards in front of American positions. Technical Sergeant John Polakowski crouched in his foxhole as Japanese soldiers streamed past. He watched in amazement. It reminded me of a circus ground, or maybe Yankee Stadium, he later recalled. The crowd just milled out on the field, pushing and shoving and yelling. There were so many of them, you could just shut your eyes and pull the trigger, and you'd be bound to hit 3 or 4 with one shot. Then American artillery arrived. The concentrated barrage didn't just kill, it disintegrated. High-explosive shells detonated in perfect synchronization. They created an invisible wall of steel fragments and concussion. Everything within a 200-yard radius was shredded. Japanese soldiers charging at full speed simply vanished in the explosions. Others were hurled through the air like rag dolls. Their screams were lost in the deafening roar of coordinated destruction. But still, they came. Wounded Japanese soldiers crawled forward on their bellies. They dragged rifles and grenades. A group of civilians stumbled through smoke and carnage. Women and children forced into the charge. Their eyes were wide with terror and propaganda-induced determination. American Marines trained to show no mercy in combat hesitated for precious seconds. They realized they were firing at families. Captain Louis Ackerman screamed into his radio, "For God's sake, Bernie, get that artillery closer. I'm already placing shells within 150 yards of your position. Make it 75 yards, right on top of us." The second artillery barrage arrived with even deadlier precision. Shells exploded so close to American positions that dirt and shrapnel rained down on their own foxholes. The mathematical perfection of American coordination created a meat grinder. Human courage was transformed into systematic slaughter. Behind the main Japanese assault, Captain Sakai Oba led 200 officers in a secondary charge. Their swords raised like medieval knights. These were Japan's military elite, career soldiers with decades of training, samurai descendants carrying family blades centuries old. They charged into the American artillery barrage, believing their spiritual purity would somehow overcome mathematics and steel. They were wrong. Meanwhile, at the 2nd Battalion aid station, Captain Ben Salomon heard screaming from inside his tent. A Japanese soldier had crawled under the canvas wall and bayoneted a wounded American lying helpless on a stretcher. Without hesitation, the dentist grabbed a wounded soldier's M1 carbine and shot the intruder dead. 2 more Japanese soldiers charged through the tent entrance. Salomon moved with the reflexes of infantry training he had begged for. He swung the rifle like a baseball bat. The wooden stock smashed against the first attacker's skull. The rifle broke apart in his hands. He grabbed another weapon, shot the second soldier, and bayoneted a third who was crawling under the tent wall. "Everybody out!" Salomon shouted to his medics. "Get the wounded back to regimental aid station. I'll hold them off." 4 more Japanese soldiers crawled under the tent flaps. The dentist, who wanted to be a warrior, killed them with rifle and bayonet. His wire-rimmed glasses were shattered. His shirt was torn and bloody. Both his own blood and the enemy's covered his hands. Outside the tent, the Japanese charge had penetrated deeper into American positions than anyone thought possible. Despite devastating artillery, Sheer numbers and suicidal determination had carried hundreds of attackers past the front lines. They were now assaulting Marine artillery batteries positioned behind the infantry. Marine gunners abandoned their normal indirect fire missions. They started shooting their 105mm howitzers point-blank into the oncoming waves of Japanese troops. Line of sight directly into the oncoming waves, as one survivor later described it. The massive artillery pieces designed to lob shells miles away became the world's largest shotguns. They fired high-explosive rounds directly into human targets at ranges of less than 100 yards. The sound was indescribable. The crack of rifle fire, the boom of point-blank artillery, the screams of wounded and dying men in 2 languages, and underneath it all, the continuous chanting of Teino Haka Banzai from Japanese soldiers who kept charging even as their comrades were blown apart around them. Captain Salomon emerged from his aid station to find Japanese soldiers overrunning the entire 2nd Battalion front. His medics had evacuated the wounded, but the enemy was everywhere. Without hesitation, he ran to a .30 caliber water-cooled machine gun whose crew had been killed. He began firing steady, methodical bursts into the attacking Japanese. The dentist had become a one-man fortress. For the next 6 hours, as dawn broke over Saipan and American artillery continued its systematic destruction of the Japanese charge, Ben Salomon moved his machine gun 4 separate times to maintain the best fields of fire. Each time he was wounded. Bullet holes, bayonet cuts, shrapnel wounds. But he kept firing until his ammunition ran out, and Japanese soldiers finally overwhelmed his position. By 10:30 a.m., the largest Banzai charge in Pacific War history was over. The mathematical precision of American artillery coordination had turned Japanese spiritual determination into the most one-sided massacre of the Pacific conflict. The coastal plain north of the 105th Infantry's positions was carpeted with 4311 Japanese bodies. Soldiers, sailors, and civilians who believed honor was more important than survival. American coordination had defeated Japanese courage so completely that Banzai charges would never again be used as a primary tactic. The age of samurai warfare died in the artillery barrage that turned mathematics into mass destruction. When smoke cleared and final counts were made, the numbers told a story of technological evolution written in blood and mathematics. 4,311 Japanese bodies lay scattered across coral beaches and volcanic slopes of northern Saipan. The spiritual warriors of an ancient military culture were systematically destroyed by American industrial warfare. The cost to the defenders was 406 Americans killed and 512 wounded, devastating losses that nonetheless paled beside the Japanese annihilation. Major General George Greiner, Jr. commanded the 27th Infantry Division. He led grim counting parties across the battlefield. Near the 2nd Battalion aid station, they discovered a scene that would haunt American military history. Captain Salomon's body lay bent over the barrel of his machine gun. His ammunition was completely exhausted. He was surrounded by 98 Japanese corpses arranged in neat rows like some macabre testament to precision marksmanship. The area to the front of the weapon was covered with enemy dead. Chief Warrant Officer Stephen Burns later testified, in some instances, 3 and 4 bodies high. By following the trail of spent cartridges and the pattern of bodies, they determined that Salomon moved his machine gun 4 separate times before running out of ammunition. He fought through 76 bullet wounds, 24 of which occurred before his death. The dentist who wanted to be an infantry officer had gotten his wish in the most horrific way possible. But Salomon's heroism revealed a bitter irony of military bureaucracy. When combat historian Captain Edmund Love recommended him for the Medal of Honor, General Greiner rejected the nomination. He believed Salomon violated the Geneva Convention by wielding weapons as a medical officer. For 58 years, the most lethal dentist in American military history remained unhonored. His sacrifice was buried in bureaucratic misunderstanding. It took until May 1, 2002, and multiple advocacy campaigns by fellow USC dental school graduates before President George W. Bush finally presented Salomon's posthumous Medal of Honor in the White House Rose Garden. He remains the only dentist in American military history to receive the nation's highest decoration for valor. The broader impact of July 7, 1944, reverberated far beyond individual heroism. The systematic destruction of the largest banzai charge in history marked the definitive end of Japan's spiritual approach to warfare. Never again would Japanese commanders attempt to overcome American technological superiority through mass suicidal attacks. The mathematics of coordinated artillery had proven more powerful than centuries of samurai tradition. American time-on-target coordination became the template for modern military doctrine. The technique that synchronized multiple artillery batteries to deliver simultaneous devastating firepower worked on Saipan's coral beaches. It would evolve into the precision warfare of the 21st century. Satellite-guided munitions and computer-coordinated strikes can now destroy targets with mathematical certainty. For surviving Japanese defenders, the psychological impact was equally profound. Sergeant Takeo Yamamoto played dead in his foxhole during the charge. He later reflected, "We were real soldiers, real men. We did not want to be slaughtering what was left of the women, children, elderly, and infirm left in Japan." The systematic destruction of their comrades forced even dedicated Japanese soldiers to question the wisdom of spiritual warfare against technological superiority. The strategic consequences proved equally decisive. With Saipan secured by July 9th, American B-29 superfortresses began operating from the island's airfields. Japan's home islands came within bombing range for the first time. The coordinated artillery barrage that destroyed the Banzai charge directly enabled the bombing campaigns that would ultimately force Japan's surrender. Modern military analysts studying the Battle of Saipan identified July 7, 1944, as the moment when industrial warfare definitively defeated traditional military culture. The same technological coordination principles guide modern warfare: synchronized timing, mathematical precision, overwhelming concentrated firepower. These now direct everything from GPS-guided artillery to drone swarm attacks. Yet the human cost remained staggering. The Japanese civilians forced to participate in the Banzai charge represent warfare's ultimate tragedy. Men, women, and children were terrorized by propaganda into believing American capture meant torture and death. Their bodies mixed among the soldiers on Saipan's beaches remind us that technological superiority doesn't eliminate war's fundamental horror. It only makes the killing more efficient. Captain Salomon's machine gun, surrounded by 98 enemy bodies, stands as testament to individual courage within systematic warfare. The dentist who became a warrior proved that even in an age of technological coordination, personal heroism still matters. His 58-year wait for recognition reminds us that bureaucracy often fails to understand the very heroism it's supposed to honor. The Banzai charge died on Saipan's coral beaches. American mathematics killed it. But the human stories of courage, sacrifice, and the terrible cost of war continue to resonate 80 years later. They remind us that behind every military technological advancement lie individual human beings who pay the ultimate price for victory.